sit? Yeah. Because if I stand up, I hit the ceiling. Thanks very much. I knew before coming here that from our conversation that that Dr. Springer's comments would be about vulnerability. So I wanted to talk a little bit about vulnerability from my perspective as a physician and as a psychiatrist and as a scientist, and not necessarily as a religious figure or a religious a pastoral counselor, but perhaps from a spiritual perspective as well. From my perspective of vulnerability, my main focus in terms of vulnerability is the vulnerability of human beings. I work every day with countless patients, cancer patients who are facing death. And vulnerability for me is most relevant when it comes to our vulnerability as human beings. To be honest with you, having had a very Orthodox Jewish education and just going through the Haggadah, I really had no idea that God was imperfect in any way or was vulnerable. I had not taken on that burden of being responsible for God's vulnerability. I was mainly concerned with my own vulnerability. I know that there are concerns about repairing the world, that the world is imperfect and vulnerable. Right? Tikkun Shokun, Tikkun Olam, the idea that we repair the world. I think let me focus on human beings and being imperfect. I'll delve into territory that I'm not an expert on, which is religious territory or a biblical text. Apparently, Adam and Eve were created perfect, but Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, and we became imperfect, right? And what became imperfect about us is that we were no longer immortal. We were now mortal human beings. So the main vulnerability of human beings, the main imperfection of human beings is that we are mortal and that we die. And that is what our vulnerability and the sense of imperfection arises from. We are mortal, we die. And Howard Jacobson, the novelist, the Jewish novelist who won the Booker Prize for the Finkler Question, talks a little bit about the birth of comedy. He says comedy was born in the Garden of Eden, and basically the way one can deal with death in a variety of ways. One of the ways to deal with the fear of death or the fact of death and our mortality is through comedy and rebellion and telling dirty jokes. And that's what the Greek tragedies and the satyr plays, the Greek satyr plays. But Howard Jacobson likes to joke that what would Adam and Eve do if they were perfect and immortal in the Garden of Eden? Would they garden? And if they didn't buy from the tree of knowledge, they wouldn't even be able to name the plants that they were gardening. So he says that our imperfection really is the source of everything that we value and love about being alive. So our vulnerability, our sense of being imperfect, only comes from our encountering suffering and limitations. Carl Jasper's the famous Jewish psychiatrist and philosopher, said that suffering comes from any human being's encounter with limitations, any kind of limitation. And death is the ultimate limitation. And so vulnerability comes from our encounter with these kinds of limitations, and death is the ultimate limitation. We feel imperfect because we can never achieve in our lifetime the task of creating a life that is completely unique unique to us, that is completely authentic to us, that is created full of meaning, growth, living up to our full potential, transformative. We're constantly creating ourselves, and we can't ever really meet up to that sense of expectation of what we should, how we should create ourselves in the world. Albert Einstein's last words on his deathbed were, "If only I knew more mathematics." Some mathematicians do that. So none of us really achieve that. So that's part of our imperfection. Existential philosophers, psychotherapists like myself would say that that is a representation of something called existential guilt. We all have existential guilt because we are imperfect. We can never achieve perfection. We can never achieve immortality. Related to that is this idea of existential isolation. If we are imperfect and we are flawed, right, what do we do that with that sense of imperfection? There are two things that can happen that depend on the attitude that we take towards our imperfection, our vulnerability. There are two things that can happen. And this word attitude, I want you to think of attitude as not only a way of thinking, but a way of being human. I want you to think of attitude as being related to your idea of what the essence of a human being is, the creation of our essence, or the spirit or the soul of a human being. Because I believe that not only do we create our lives every day, we also create our soul every day. Okay? We're constantly creating our soul as we grow as human beings. That essential attitudinal part of who we are. Other people call it our presence or our essence or our energy. We're in a synagogue, we call it the soul. So if you take this, if the attitude is to take vulnerability and to move in the direction of connection to others, right? If we understand that our own imperfection allows us to do one of the most important things we do as human beings, which is to have empathy for others. Because we're imperfect, we can empathize with the imperfection of others. Empathy allows us to love someone else. And paradoxically, it's our own imperfection that allows others to love us. So love is only possible because we're imperfect. And love is only possible and empathy is only possible if we embrace our imperfection. We take the attitude that our imperfection, our vulnerability, is what makes us uniquely human and allows us to have the unique human experience of being, which is complex and beautiful, right? Courage is the ability to embrace your vulnerability. A lot of people think of courage using other words like wholeheartedness, compassion, connectedness to others, the idea of transcendence. I've always had trouble with the idea of transcendence. And what transcendence is all about is connection, trans. I sometimes try to teach doctors about transcendence, and I developed a psychotherapy called meaning-centered psychotherapy based on Viktor Frankl's work, logotherapy work, and it's a psychotherapy that works quite well for patients with advanced cancer, and we've been adapting it for other purposes. And so I try to talk about transcendence. I give them an example of escalators in airports. We all know what the ascending escalator is. That's the escalator that goes up. We all know what the descending escalator is. That's the escalator that takes us down. So I asked them, where are the transcending escalators in the airport? And usually somebody goes, it's those walkways that take us. And that's exactly what transcendence is about. It's about connecting ourselves to not only others, but to ourselves, and for folks, for a religious community, connection with some power greater than ourselves, God, right? So there is this, that's what transcendence is, connection. And what comes from this particular attitude of embracing our vulnerability, being courageous, not seeing it as the way to allow us to have loving connections in the world, also allows us to deal with uncertainty, the uncertain future. Okay, uncertain. There are two kinds of future. Jacques Derrida, Sephardic, Jewish, French. I don't know how many more adjectives to place on him. Philosopher talks about the uncertain future. So there are two kinds of future. There's a certain future, which is completely ununique. It's the same in all of us. We have no ability to alter it. You're born, you live, you die. Boom. Got it? That's your future. Okay. Very appealing. Then there's the uncertain future. The uncertain future is the only kind of future that allows us the possibility of having the agency in creating our future. It's the only kind of future that allows us to take part in the creation of our future. It's the uncertain future that allows for that unique someone or something to unexpectedly enter our lives and for us to recognize that and say, that's going to change my life, and pick up on that. So uncertainty allows for infinite possibilities. Certainty only allows for one or two. Three? Maybe? Okay. If the other attitude is one of shame, my vulnerability, shame, then what you do is you become disconnected. You become disconnected. You then fall into the realm of our other great existential fear, which is existential isolation. The idea that we exist alone. You can lie in bed next to your spouse, and then you go, I'm still in it all alone. You know? When I face death, it'll just be me facing death. When I was born, I know my mother would have something to do with it. My father was maybe in the room, maybe not, depending on the year. But it was me, you know, I was going through it alone. Existential isolation. But what's key to existential isolation is that it interrupts one of the most essential human characteristics, which is the knowledge that we need each other. We need to connect to each other to survive. We need to connect to each other, to ideas and values and virtues in the world that we care about. We need to connect to the past, present, and future. And some of us need to connect to something transcendent, something higher than some higher power. I don't know that you need all of them, but certainly many of those can help with transcendence. And so, with existential isolation, what you fear is being driven out from the tribe. There, we reject you. You are imperfect. You have cancer. Get out. You have a disability. You're old and you're demented. It's what we fear, existential isolation. And with that, and so connectedness is the antidote to existential isolation. And empathy is the antidote to shame, actually. And so with this attitude, if we don't take the attitude of being courageous and embracing our vulnerability with empathy, we experience things like shame, suffering, demoralization, depression, anger, blame, hopelessness, numbness, even the need for more certainty. I need to know more certainty. So I see vulnerability as one of the main issues in the care of patients who are ill, who are dying, and is the main issue for all of us who even aren't ill. We're all mortal. We all have to deal with this vulnerability, this imperfection. And the way, the attitude that we take towards that is what's going to allow us to live a mortal, finite life. And it's the attitude that we need to cultivate. It's that our soul, our essence, that we need to cultivate and grow. And that's what has to become wise over time. And I think those are my comments, but I'd love very much, Rabbi Spencer, if we could talk more about prayer. If you want to talk about Sam Klagsberg, talk about him a little bit. And also the relationship between human vulnerability and our poor God who has vulnerability issues as well, and our obligation towards helping God. Because I think often in prayer we're beseeching God for help. So where does God's vulnerability come in to play when we pray? But I'd love to talk about prayer. I like prayer very much as an issue to discuss.